pleasure to see a lot of people here and a lot of familiar faces, and absolute joy to see Bhojraj here, my very close friend from Kathmandu. Uh, this coronavirus has given us this opportunity to get connected by means of the technology which is available to us. And I'm thankful to Alembic for giving me an opportunity to speak on a topic which is very close to my heart, that is percutaneous renal access. Now, in the last 20 years, since PCNL has become very popular in all parts of the world, there are at least 4 to 5 workshops for CMEs which are held in every country or district every year. And interestingly, the emphasis on every workshop, every CME, even today after 20 to 30 years of PCNL in practice, is percutaneous renal access. And the reason for this is very simple, because it is either the gateway to success or disaster. If your access is proper, then everything is fine. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of complications. Yeah. Now, coming to the indications for PCNL, when we were doing our super specialty in MCH and DNB, it used to be stones more than 2 or 3 centimeters in size, which used to be indications for PCNL. But now there are a lot of other factors which have come into vogue, like Hounsfield, the location of the stone, the anatomical relationship of the stone to the calyces, and hence I think what was the Lingman's law is still holds true today. That if the stone problem is simple, any intervention will be useful. But if the stone problem is complex, one should opt for PCNL. And when I say PCNL, it can be a standard PCNL or mini PCNL or one of its variants. So what is the planning for PCNL? Now, before we go into the planning, there are a number of ways in which PCNL is being practiced. There is a prone position, a supine position, and a lot of variants. What I would be speaking on would be dominantly the prone position. And if time permits, I would go on to give some of my views about the supine PCNL. Now, PCNL is usually done under anesthesia. Very rarely it is done under local anesthesia. It can be done under general, spinal, or epidural anesthesia. According to me, even in this time when corona is so rampant and everybody wants to avoid general anesthesia, corona will pass off. But if you look at the indications for general anesthesia in PCNL, people who are not so experts in PCNL, a large stone burden, supracostal puncture, and an PCNL which is done in an unfamiliar OT, where a urologist is called to do a PCNL and he is not familiar with the OT as well as the OT staff, he will end up taking a bit more time. So it is always better to do this procedure under general anesthesia. The first step of doing a PCNL is insertion of a ureteric catheter. And this is very useful to instill the contrast. Here I would like to mention that the contrast needs to be instilled slowly, keeping the ureteric catheter renal pelvis so that there is no sudden distension of the entire pelvic calyceal system, resulting in extravasation of the contrast, and preferably dilute the contrast to a ratio of 1:3. The only exception to this rule is if the patient is obese, this is showing a very clear picture and you need to have a dense contrast, it is to dilute it in a ratio of 1:2 or 1:1. Otherwise, I usually follow the dilution of 1:3. Now, positioning of the patient. Now, we are all aware of this particular diagram from Campbell's Urology, where it is emphasized that we need to protect the pressure points and keep the arms and legs in such a way that there is no compression of nerves. If you look carefully at this particular figure, there is one flaw in this figure. The patient is in the center of the OT table. And any person who has been practicing PCNL would realize that it is always better to have the patient much closer to the edge of the table, close to you, so that you don't have to bend over, because as a lot of people say that the urologist's back is 2 years older than the urologist, I think our back needs to be as fit as we are. So proper position of the patient is equally important. Now, how to make the patient prone? All of us have been doing PCNL and it looks like a very simple, silly question, but mind it, this is a very crucial step when the patient is under GA. There have been case reports where the patient have landed up in quadriparesis because of some problem occurring at the level of the cervical spine. Under general anesthesia, the process of making the patient prone requires an combination between the various methods. Having been different types of operation theaters of varying size, I feel the safest way is once you have introduced the ureteric catheter, have a trolley by the side of your OT table, shift the patient on that OT table, and then turn the patient prone from that side table onto the main OT table. This I felt was the safest way. And the anesthetist coordinates it. At our setup, it is at the count of 3. When the anesthetist 3, every person is involved. There is a person at the leg, one at the middle part of the torso, one near the chest, and the anesthetist taking care of the neck as well as the endotracheal tube. Now, when we talk of puncture techniques, there are 2 types: ultrasound guided, fluoroscopic guided, or a combination of both. And I would be speaking dominantly on the fluoroscopic guided percutaneous renal access. When we talk of PCNL, the entire process of PCNL can be divided into this mnemonic, that is P stands for pole to be selected, C stands for calyx to be selected, N is navigation to the calyx, that is the actual process of percutaneous renal access, and L stands for looking into the kidney, that is the process of nephroscopy. So the first step would be which pole to puncture. Now, we need to puncture the pole which provides the straightest path along the stone axis and which provides access for complete or maximum clearance of the stone load. If we decide on this particular policy, we come to know whether we'll need a single or multiple puncture. Now, if you buy the textbook, it mentions that when a calyx contains calculus more than 2 centimeters and is unlikely to be approached by a rigid instrument via the primary axis, or when a calyx contains stone of any size not be reached with flexible instruments via the primary axis, usually for multiple punctures. The suggestion of beginners is look at your IVU plates and draw what I call it as a outline. This I very close friend of that outlinogram, you can get an idea regarding what axis you need to take. And suppose if you are likely to take an upper pole axis, as you can see in the picture on your right hand side, you would be able to clear virtually everything except the middle pole calyx. But if you are going to take a lower pole puncture, it is possible that you might clear even the middle pole, but the upper pole infundibulum would be a bit narrow one. So the outlinogram will give you an idea which calyx needs to be punctured from which area, that is which pole. But for this proper planning, it is imperative that you need to have a plate of your IVU in a prone position, because this will give you a perfect idea regarding what your RGP being. Advice I tell is if there are multiple punctures needed, and if you think that you might need 1 or more punctures, make all the access right at the initial part and park. If you are likely to make a puncture while doing the PCN, like you now which calyx which we need to puncture. Here the best access would be where a calyx forms an angle equal to or greater than 90 degrees with the PUJ. Once you know that calyx, that is the calyx which you need to puncture so that you can approach the upper pole. And very often in prone position, it is the middle or the upper pole calyx which qualifies this way. Now, before we go to the actual percutaneous renal access, few words regarding the anatomy of the kidney. We all know that the kidney lies on the posterior abdominal wall against the psoas muscle. And we need to remember that the psoas muscle is not flat, but is cone-shaped. And the longitudinal axis of the kidneys is parallel to the oblique course of the psoas at an angle of 13 to 30 degrees to the midline. So kidneys in their longitudinal axis have a dorsal tilt. The upper pole is more medial and more posterior than the lower pole. And hence, if it's an upper pole puncture, then your puncture is more likely to be medial at times, and the upper pole is having a shorter track because it is more posterior than the lower pole. Also, we know that the kidneys are rotated about 30 degrees posteriorly. That is, the lateral aspect of the kidney is much more posterior than the medial aspect. In simple words, the kidneys are angled about 30 to 50 degrees behind the frontal plane. Now, this is fine as far as the anatomy is concerned with the patient in supine position. But what happens in prone position? The lower pole of the kidney is placed more anteriorly than the upper pole, and the pelvis tends to fall more anteriorly. And we will see subsequently how this anatomical change has an important bearing when we make a percutaneous renal access. Now, the next question comes is what to puncture. I think about 2 years and absolutely, but in the last 2 years, there has been a lot of debate about whether it should be a papillary puncture or a non-papillary puncture. That is, whether you should puncture the calyx or infundibulum. Now, we have always been taught that you should puncture through the fornix, or that is the papilla, and enter the calyx, and not through the infundibulum. This is so because once you puncture the infundibulum, there is a very high risk of damage to the important arteries which are supplying the kidneys, and we all know that these arteries are end arteries. So if we puncture through the calyx, we are likely to miss all the important arteries, the arcuate artery, the interlobar arteries, and the entry will be perfect. But if we go via the infundibulum, there is a high chance that the interlobar arteries and at times even the segmental artery can be injured. So why this debate? This came about because of two publications from the same group. One was a retrospective study and the other was a prospective trial, where they compared papillary with the non-papillary puncture, and they demonstrated that when they punctured the infundibulum, they did not have much of a problem. But whether this particular adage should be accepted wholeheartedly, I would like to quote two articles. One was by myself and Dr. Bhojraj, was a review article, and the other one is what is published in 2019 in the World Journal of Urology. And when these people have looked at these two studies, we have realized that it's a single center study. Mainly the middle calyx has been punctured. And when you puncture the infundibulum, how do you remove the calycial calculi? Of course, there is an increased parenchymal damage. And what about the long-term risk of infundibular stenosis? Nobody has actually evaluated this. So at present, the acceptance worldwide is that you should go for a papillary puncture. Now, once we have decided that it has to be a papillary puncture, the next question is which calyx to puncture. And we have always been taught that it's a posterior calyx which needs to be punctured. So why a posterior calyx? And the answer to this is very simple if we understand the arterial supply of the kidney. That is, we all are aware that there is the Brodal's line. Now, this is an arteriogram which shows the Brodal's line. And these are CT scan images. On your left-hand side, what is marked as D is the posterior segmental artery, and what is marked as V is the anterior segmental artery. Just a millimeter or a couple of millimeters at this level, when you look at the pelvic calycial system, these are the two calyces which are seen. So if you are going to puncture a posterior calyx, you will be going through what is called as the Brodal's line, which is the avascular line. So why a posterior calyx needs to be punctured? The answer is simple. The puncture will pass through a relatively avascular Brodal zone, and it will give a direct path to the renal pelvis. But if you puncture an anterior calyx, then there is an increased risk of injury to the vessels as well as to the liver and spleen. Importantly, there is an acute angle between the line of puncture and infundibulum. So whenever there is a manipulation of the rigid nephroscope in the pelvic calycial system via an anterior calyx, there will be more torque on the renal parenchyma, resulting in more damage to it. Now, what type of needle should be used for puncture? And it should be an 18 gauge diamond tip needle. We should never use a bevel tip needle. The reason for this comes from a study which is published in the Journal of Medical Engineering and Physics, which found that a diamond tip needle is symmetrical tip needle. It exerts forces on all the tissues equally in all directions. So cutting of the tissues occurs in the direction of the needle tip and not asymmetrically. If you use a bevel tip needle, then you are likely to go bit off track, and this does not happen if you use a diamond tip needle. Now, how to minimize radiation during a fluoroscopic guided renal access? You all must be aware of various ways and means, using a lead apron, a thyroid shield, having a fluoroscopic beam under the table. But the only tip that I would like to give to all of you is think before or after fluoroscopy and not during fluoroscopy. If you are thinking, don't keep the fluor. Now, once we have decided that we need to go through the papilla, we need to puncture the posterior calyx. The next question comes to our mind is, which calyx is the posterior calyx? Traditional teaching has been, you follow the mnemonic LAMP, that is lateral is anterior and medial is posterior. And trust me, it has been proved by a lot of studies that this is not true. I will give you two diagrams. I will just show two diagrams from two standard textbooks of urology. This is from Campbell's Urology, where the mnemonic LAMP was mentioned, that is lateral is anterior and medial is posterior. And if you see, all the calyces which are marked as posterior are lateral calyces. This is from the second edition of Smith's textbook of endourology, and they also mention that all the medial calyces are anterior and the lateral one are posterior. Lot of our understanding regarding the anatomy of the pelvic calyceal system has come from the studies of Sampaio. And he found that if you look at the calyceal orientation, nearly 28% of the anterior calyces are lateral, about 19% of the posterior calyces are lateral, and 53% of the times the calyces are superimposed on one another in different positions, which means that there is no classical orientation that this will be an anterior calyx which is lateral, or a posterior calyx will always be medial. This particular topic was further complicated by the description by Brodel and Hodgson. There is a Brodel's pattern and there is a Hodgson's pattern. Right from my residency, I have tried to memorize it, and very honestly, I admit that I have never been able to understand it and memorize this particular pattern. They say that 70% of the right kidneys have a Brodel pattern and 70% of left kidneys have Hodgson's pattern. Unfortunately, none of the kidneys which we undertake proclaim themselves as having the Brodel or the Hodgson's pattern, and it is left up to us to decide in which category they come. The simplest way to know the calyceal orientation is if you remember that the middle calyces have anterior and posterior orientation, and the polar calyces are oriented towards their respective poles. Now, right at the beginning of my talk, I had mentioned when you make the patient prone, the upper pole is more medial and posterior, which means that most of the upper pole calyces will be posterior and the lower pole tends to fall anteriorly. And we also know that the lower pole is having the most complex arrangement of the calyces. We will see how to identify a posterior calyx in the lower pole. This is what I was mentioning, that the kidneys have a dorsal tail, so the upper pole is more medial and more posterior. Now, if you do a fluoroscopy, this is the picture that we tend to get. And then how we identify the posterior calyx. Now, if you rotate the C-arm towards yourself, that is the C-arm is rotated 30 degrees towards the surgeon, the posterior calyces move away and shorten. That is, what is seen laterally is the anterior calyx, and what is seen medially is the posterior calyx. So when you rotate the C-arm 30 degrees towards yourself, remember the mnemonic lamp. That is, what is seen laterally is the anterior calyx and what is medial is the posterior calyx. Now here the problem comes because when you have instilled the contrast, sometimes you cannot actually decipher a calyx very properly when it has moved more medially and is superimposed on the pelvis. So if you rotate the C-arm 30 degrees away from yourself, the anterior calyces become medial and the lateral calyces are posterior, which means that whatever calyces are moving towards you when you are rotating the C-arm away from you are the posterior calyces. And here remember the mnemonic MAL, that is, what is medial is anterior and what is lateral is posterior. This is very useful for beginners when they have started making a puncture and then they are not sure whether they are entering an anterior or a posterior calyx. You can ask the person who is managing the C-arm to move the C-arm away from you, and if you are puncturing the laterally oriented calyx, you are puncturing the proper posterior calyx. Another way is when the contrast is being instilled, the anterior calyces in the prone position will fill first and the posterior calyx will appear fainter because they are getting filled up later. Sometimes, despite doing everything, it is not possible to get a clear idea. Another small trick is to instill a minimal amount of air. Mark my words, minimal, because you have already instilled good amount of contrast. And if you instill an air which is more than 5 or 10, 5 cc, then there is a risk of air embolism which is described in a lot of papers. So instill about only 2 to 5 cc of air. Air being lighter will fill the posterior calyx and the anterior calyx will always be filled up with contrast. Have a look at these images. They are filled with contrast and it's difficult to make out which is the posterior calyx. And the image on your right hand side, if you look after the air has been instilled, all the calyces virtually of the upper pole are filled with air, which means that nearly all the upper pole calyces are posterior. And in the lower pole, there are 3 calyces. In fact, the left-hand side figure shows only 2 dominant calyces, but the third calyx, which is the middle calyx, is very well filled up with air, and that is the posterior calyx. This again is a demonstration of an air pyelogram. So, as I had mentioned initially, that the middle calyces have a classical anterior and posterior orientation, and the posterior calyces are oriented towards their respective poles. And if you see in prone position, the upper pole, as you can see in the figure on your right hand side, is more medial and more posterior. So the conclusion is, in the upper pole, most of the calyces are inclined posteriorly. In the middle pole, the most ideal orientation, the classical orientation of the anterior and posterior calyx is present. And in the lower pole, there is a complex arrangement of calyces. So how to identify a posterior calyx in the lower pole? I would the article which I would definitely recommend for all of you to read is an article by Eisner et al. In the October 2009 issue of Percutaneous Renal Excess in Journal of Endourology. What they found was, they studied CT scans of 101 kidneys, and they found that 94% of the times, the medial calyx is the anterior calyx. Now they identified 2 types of orientation of the lower pole calyces. In the first type, there are only 2 calyces which are present. And they found that what is medial, that is from the medial aspect, the first calyx, 95% of the time is an anterior calyx. And the second calyx, which is the lateral calyx, 93% of times is a posterior calyx. When there are 3 lower pole calyces which are seen, the first calyx, that is the most medial calyx, is likely to be the anterior calyx 90% of the times. The second calyx is likely to be the posterior calyx 70% of the times. And the third calyx, that is the most lateral calyx, will be an anterior calyx 71% of the times. Which in simple words means that if there are 2 calyces, you always take the second calyx, that is the lateral calyx, as the posterior calyx. And if there are 3 calyces in the lower pole, you look at the second calyx, which is likely to be the posterior calyx. And this is very well exemplified by this particular image, where actually you are looking at only two calyces in the lower pole, but the moment you instill air, you get the third calyx, which is the second calyx, which is the posterior calyx. So what is the take home message? During constant contrast instillation, look for calyx which fills later in prone position and is fainter. This is likely to be the posterior calyx. If you are still not sure, tilt the C-arm 30 degrees away from you. Remember, what comes towards you, that is the lateral calyces, in that situation will be the posterior calyx. If despite all these maneuvers you are unable to pick up the posterior calyx, then instill minimum about 2 to 5 cc of. Now, after this brief introduction of the anatomy of the kidney, I would now like come to the different fluoroscopic techniques of puncture. Now, we have all learned that there are two basic techniques, the bullseye and the triangulation technique. But in 2017, the European Society of Urotechnology, in their article in British Journal of Urology, divided the fluoroscopic guided percutaneous renal access into two basic types, the monoplanar type and the biplanar type. And in the biplanar type, where you are able to rotate the C-arm in different planes, they have described three techniques: the bullseye, the triangulation technique, and my hybrid technique. So what is percutaneous renal access? It is an access to an calyx, which means that it is the art of navigating in the Bermuda's Triangle. This is the Bermuda Triangle. If you are navigating in this triangle properly, you will reach your destination safely. Otherwise, you will get lost. And we all know that this percutaneous renal access is associated with a steep learning curve. The reason for this is very important. We are looking at a two-dimensional fluoroscopic monitor, and we need to identify a three-dimensional mental picture. And what we are having a mental picture has to be actually transferred into what we are doing on the patient. Here, we have to make adjustments in the medial and lateral plane and in the anterior-posterior direction, which is possible by rotating the C-arm in various planes. So let us come first to the bullseye technique. This gets its name from the fact that when you rotate the C-arm 30 degrees towards yourself, the needle hub forms a dot on the screen, what is described as the bullseye. Now, this 30-degree rotation was taken so thoroughly, and it is still being followed, that the earlier editions of Campbell's Urology and the earlier teaching was that for bullseye, you raise the side of the patient by 30 degrees, putting a bolster or something, and then whatever calyx is seen end on, you puncture it straight directly. Nobody follows it nowadays, I feel. So in the bullseye technique, when you rotate the C-arm 30 degrees towards yourself, you distinguish, you pinpoint the calyx which you are going to puncture. And what is described by a lot of books is that when you bring back the C-arm back to 0 degrees, you get an idea regarding the depth. But what I have learned from experience initially, and which I have confirmed from literature also, is that the C-arm rotation towards the surgeon helps to align the needle tip with the desired calyx. But if you want to know the depth of correct depth, or that is you want to have a correct depth perception, you need to move the C-arm away from you more than 0 degree, maybe about 10 degrees or 15 degrees away, that is towards the person who is managing the fluoro, so that your needle where it is entering is. Otherwise, the problem with this technique is it is possible that you may overshoot the calyx. Now, what is the triangulation technique? In simple words, the triangulation technique is you puncture along the stone axis. But if you go by the definition of triangulation, it says that triangulation is using two known points of reference to locate a third unknown point. And in PCNL, the unknown point is the target calyx. And the two known points of reference are the point on skin corresponding to the target calyx and the point of skin puncture. Now, this is what is triangulation technique. This is the upper pole. This is where the renal pelvis is. This is the calyx which one intends to puncture, and this is roughly from where you would go and have a skin puncture. The angle and direction are important, and this is what you are doing in triangulation technique. That is, you are putting along the line of the infundibulum. Now, in triangulation technique, there are two things which are important. One is making the medial and lateral adjustments of the CM, which is done by keeping the CM at 0 degree or 90 degree. And the second, this is an example from Campbell, 6th edition, where they have shown a calyx which needs to be punctured. Normally, nowadays, nobody will puncture this particular calyx, but this is from the textbook. This calyx needs to be punctured, and this is the medial and lateral adjustment of the needle, which is seen here. Now, with the CM at 0 degrees, you need to make adjustments in a way that the line of the needle is exactly aligned to the calyx which you intend to puncture. If the depth adjustments are need to be done, that is the anterior-posterior adjustments have to be done, that the CM should be tilted in an oblique direction by 30 degrees. Again, this is what comes from the textbook. This is the calyx which needs to be punctured. You align the needle by making adjustments in the upward and downward direction in a way that the needle gets aligned to the calyx. One important thing which you need to mark here is that these movements of the needle are very far from the renal parenchyma and not when the needle is very close to the renal or calyx or the parenchyma. Now, in triangulation technique, we make needle adjustments in one plane, keep that adjustments in mind, and then make adjustments in the other plane. Now, again, I have already emphasized that we need not make adjustments with the needle in the parenchyma because that would traumatize the parenchyma to a larger extent. So the technique of triangulation technique, the triangulation technique is advance the needle with the CM in oblique position. First, you mark the medial and lateral adjustments with the CM at 0 degree. Then take it in the 30 degrees, make the anterior-posterior adjustments, advance the needle. Once you are close to the calyx, which you are targeted, bring the CM back to 0 degrees and make a puncture. Now, the part which is most difficult to rather master is how to assess the depth of the needle. Now, once the needle is there and the CM is at 0 degrees, we really do not know whether it's at the level of calyx, above the level of calyx, or below the level of the calyx. For this, we need to make the adjustments of the CM. So if the CM is tilted in an oblique direction, and if the needle is lower than the target, then it indicates it is superior to the target. I'll come to that later. And the best description of this comes from another technique, which is called as the 3-finger test. Here, the red finger represents the PCNL, which is the needle tip, which is above the calyx. The green suggests that the needle is the level of the calyx, and the blue suggests that it is below the level of the calyx, that is, it is deeper. Now, if the CM is at 0 degrees, we really do not know whether the needle is above at the level of calyx or is below the level of the calyx which we intend to puncture. This is what is our dilemma. So what they suggest is that you rotate the CM 30 degrees towards yourself, and whatever is superficial will move laterally. That is what I had mentioned initially. Medial is anterior and lateral is posterior, which in other words means if the needle goes too medially, which means that it is more superficially, and you need to raise your arm, that is bring the needle down, go more in the depth. If the needle is seen more lateral to the calyx, it means that you are more posteriorly and you need to be a bit more superficially, which means that you need to depress your arm and bring the needle up superficially. One another practical tip which I can say to determine the depth is you place another needle on the skin surface over the target calyx with the CM at 0 degree. Then you rotate the CM 30 degree obliquely in the cephalocaudal direction. If the calyx is between the two needles, then the puncture needle is deep and should be adjusted superficially. If the target calyx is below the two needles, it means that the puncture needle is superficial and it should be adjusted towards the depth. Now, if you weigh both the triangulation technique and the bullseye technique, there has been a study by Tepler et al. Where they actually did not find major differences between the two calyx, except for the fact that the complication rate with the bullseye technique was 20%, but it was only 15% in the triangulation technique. They mentioned that this is not statistically significant, but when I have talked to a lot of experts in PCNL, everybody feels that the triangulation technique is better. Now, the bullseye technique has an advantage that the site of skin puncture and the angle of puncture is determined. But the drawback is that the axis is not aligned with the infundibulum. So if there is a torque by the rigid nephroscope, there will be trauma to the parenchyma and increased risk of bleeding. Now, if you look at what are the criteria for a good puncture, and they have been defined by the Smith's textbook of endourology by Bernardo et al., they mentioned that a good puncture should fulfill 5 criteria. The access should be from the posterolateral position through the renal parenchyma towards the center of a posterolateral calyx. It should be aligned towards the renal, and the trajectory should not damage any major blood vessel. Now, if you look carefully, the bullseye does not fulfill the 4th criteria most of the times, unless and until it is from the middle pole. The triangulation technique ideally fulfills all these 5 criteria, but the problem with the triangulation technique is the angle and depth of puncture is difficult to determine, and the site of skin puncture is determined arbitrarily. So what is the best solution? The best solution would be to find one of these techniques. This is what is achieved in the technique which is described by Smith's textbook of urology as the hybrid technique. Now, if we look rationally at percutaneous renal access, it's very easy to understand. You need only 3 things for a percutaneous renal access. You need a site of skin puncture, you need to determine the angle of puncture, and you know the depth of puncture. Now, why this site of skin puncture is important? Now, suppose this is the calyx you need to puncture. You can puncture from any of the sites. One can puncture. Only one site will be the correct site, because this will align the direction of the needle perfectly in the direction of the infundibulum. The site of skin puncture is extremely important, but depending upon the anatomical orientation of pelvic calyceal system, which is distinct for every kidney, it needs to be individualized. But unfortunately, for a very long time, there were no standard guidelines. They only said that you need to take care of 3 things. There should be a straight axis, it should be a short tract, and it should be at a smooth angle. The first paper describing how to determine the site of skin puncture for the triangulation technique was published by us in 2009. This is in Journal of Endourology. So how do we determine the site of skin puncture? Now, if you look carefully here, this is the site of skin which is corresponding to the calyx which we intend to puncture with the CM at 0 degree. And when the CM is rotated 30 degrees towards the surgeon, this is the site which is getting marked, which is the point B. So with the CM at 0 degree, you mark a point A on the skin surface. Then you rotate the CM 30 degrees towards yourself. And then you place the needle in such a way that it forms a bullseye. And this is the point where the skin puncture can be done if you are following a bullseye technique. and this is the point B, right? So there are 2 points which come. This is the point A, which is corresponding target calyx with the C at 0 degree, and this is the point B, which corresponds to the skin surface of the target calyx with the CM rotated 30 degrees towards the triangle that you get. Now, if you look at a circle, this is the center, that is, imagine this is our target calyx, and this is the site of skin surface. So you get a radius, and we know that the radius of any circle, whether you measure it from here, you measure it from here, you measure it from here, remains the same. And this same principle is used in the hybrid technique. Now, once you have decided to puncture the lower pole calyx, you have marked the point A on the skin surface, you have marked the point B on the skin surface by rotating the CM 30 degrees towards yourself. You have a distance which is A to B, but in triangulation technique, this is your axis. This is your axis. So from point A, you mark a distance at point B1. The point A to B is the same as the point A to B1. This is point A. This is the point B. You measure this distance. This is the line that you get, AB. And if you want to puncture in the line of the infundibulum, you mark the point B1. The distance A to B is the same as the distance A to B1. For middle pole, the point A is fixed, the point B and B1 are one and the same, right? Now, what is, once you have determined this, now in 2014, rather it got published in 2015, we published our article on determining the angle and depth of puncture in fluoroscopic guided renal access in prone position in Indian Journal of Urology. Now, the point C is the center of a sphere. What we have found out is we have determined the radius of the sphere. Now, at the point A, the angle that we are getting, if you make a direct puncture, is 90 degrees. But when you bring the needle at the point B and you bring the needle and align it with the fluoroscopy in such a way that you are seeing what is called as a bullseye, it forms an angle. We measure this particular angle by using a protractor. And we have found that depending upon the degree of hydronephrosis and depending upon how the kidney is oriented, this angle ranges anything from 45 degrees to 70 degrees. Once this angle is measured, the same angle is used for puncturing from the point B1. That is, if you want to puncture the lower pole or the upper pole where you get a different point from, that is B1, you use the same angle which you have determined at the point B. The third aspect of a percutaneous renal access is calculating the depth of a puncture. This is especially true for beginners because they are very worried whether they will go too deep, they may go damage certain structures. And if you have a rough idea regarding the depth of puncture, you are very confident that near about you will be able to hit that calyx at that depth. Now for this, I should actually give credit to my wife who found out that you can find the depth of puncture by the Universal Triangle Solver, which is available as an app in Google Play Store. What it says that if there is a triangle and if you have any two parameters, that is two sides and an angle, or two angle and a single side, you can calculate the remaining parameter. What does it mean? Let me explain it in a bit more detail. If you look at this figure on your left hand side, you know that you have a triangle A, B, and C. There are 3 points which you have determined. What we know is one side and two angles. We know one side, that is from point A to B, that is one side. We have one angle which is 90 degrees at the point A, and we have another angle which is measured at the point B. So what we have is a triangle. But you may think that this triangle is beneath the skin surface, and whatever measurements have been done above the skin surface. Now in our school days, we have learned the vertical angle theorem, that if two angles are vertical, then they are congruent, which means that if this angle is known, this particular angle in the depth, that is beneath the skin surface, is congruent. That is, this angle and this angle are one and the same. That is, if the angle that you have measured above the skin surface is 56 degrees, this is what is going to be the angle where you are going to approach. Now, the biggest advantage that I have found with calculating the depth is in obese patients, where I know beforehand that the sheath that I am likely to use, whether it is okay to use a 16 centimeter Amplas or a 20 centimeter Amplas. The example that I am quoting here is of a 120 kg patient, where we calculated that the distance AB was 4 centimeter, the angle calculated was 65 degrees, and by the Universal Triangle Solver, the depth was likely to be 9.5 centimeter. So I was sure that even if I used a 16 centimeter Amplas sheath, I would be able to reach the calyx very comfortably. European Society of Urotechnology has described another way to calculate the depth. And I would take a minute to describe this technique also. And we are at present conducting a study comparing both these techniques of calculating the depth and finding which is more accurate. What they said was, when you are calculating the radius, it is like knowing a part of the circumference of the circle. Now, this particular angle is 30 degrees. If you look at the entire circle, this is 360 degrees. So what you know is part of that 30 degrees x. What we have is 12x. So if you know that the circumference can be known by the formula 2 pi r. X is the radius, what we have calculated above, the distance AB. So 12x is going to be the circumference. So 12 into x is the circumference, which is equal to 2 pi r. That is r, that is the depth, will be 12 into the distance measured at the skin surface divided by 6.28. I really do not know which of the two methods is more accurate. I usually follow the method which I have already described earlier. Our experience has been that the hybrid technique works well for the upper, middle, and lower pole. It works in whichever way you want to do a puncture. We have found that you are able to achieve a successful puncture in a single attempt in more than 95% of the cases. And in our initial study, we calculated the difference between the calculated depth and the actual depth, and we found that it was only between 0 to 3 millimeters. But there are certain things which we need to remember. The measurement of site of puncture and angle is very important, and it should be done in the same phase of respiration. If you are going to make the measurements in the different phases of respiration, your entire results can be wrong. We do it at end expiration, and credit goes to my anesthetist who maintains that position when we are taking these measurements. Second thing is, take the help of your assistant or an anesthetist to see the angle on the protractor, because see, you are looking at the fluoroscopy screen so that your needle is maintaining a bullseye when you are measuring the angle. And when you start looking at the angle, your hand moves a bit, and then your angle can move by about 5 to 10 degrees, which can be totally wrong. So you keep on looking at the fluoro monitor, maintain the bullseye, and let the anesthetist see the angle with the help of the protractor. Very honestly speaking, with depth, the depth need not be calculated most of the time. With experience, you are able to look at the depth, actually rather feel it. And as surgeons, our tactile sensation is really very good, and we are able to actually perceive that we have hit the calyx properly very easily. I feel that hybrid technique describes all the three things which are needed for a good puncture: the site of skin puncture, the angle of puncture, and the depth of puncture. And I would like to quote what my friend Dr. Bhojraj often says, that if you don't know skin angle and depth, that is sad. You will be very sad when you will do a percutaneous renal access. I feel that it will decrease the fluoroscopy time, especially during the learning curve, and possibly it decreases the learning curve also. I will just show a small video describing this. It's just a 2-minute video. Yeah, this is about a 25mm calculus, which is filling the entire pelvis. And when you instill the contrast, a diluted contrast, you can see that there is a calyx which is filling late. It is a faint calyx, which is the posterior calyx. The point A is marked with the Siam at 0 degree. With the Siam rotated 30 degrees towards you, the point B1 is marked. The point B and B1 are the same. The
So,
protractor is held.
so sorry to intervene, but the video is not visible, sir.
Okay, sorry.
So
I will just
you have to stop screen and then you have to switch to that.
stop share,
Yeah,
share
and
screen.
yes, and then
Yes.
click on the video.
Yeah, this is the point A. I think it is seen now.
No, sir, not
Is the
yet.
video seen?
Not yet, sir.
Okay, sorry. Okay. I have gone on the Zoom. Yeah. Yeah. Now in?
It's loading, sir. Yeah. Now we can see,
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. See, the point A is marked with the Siam at 0 degree. You rotate the Siam 30 degrees towards you. The point B is marked. You measure the angle, and if you see the protractor is held parallel to the operation table. The anesthetist has noted the angle, and we make the puncture through that, from that angle, from that site of skin surface, and you can see the jet of urine coming out, which indicates that it is properly in place. The guide wire walks in. Yeah. So after this, I will, so far I have described what is the middle pole and the lower pole puncture. But this is very important, the upper pole puncture. Lot of people who do PCNL routinely still are very skeptical when they want to puncture an upper pole. A lot of it stems from the initial studies which said that the overall pleural complications are to a tune of about 37%. But all the recent studies which have been done in the last decade found that the risk of complications is less than 1 to 2%. In fact, the fear of a supracostal puncture was so much so that one of the earlier editions of Campbell even described a technique where you actually go below the rib, and then you make a puncture from that point to the upper pole, which I think was traversing a lot of parenchyma. People have even described puncturing a calyx, bringing the kidney down and then making an upper pole puncture so that the supracostal puncture is avoided. With my experience and the experience of a lot of people who do PCNL routinely, I can assure you that upper pole punctures are pretty safe and the risk of pleural complications like hydrothorax, pneumothorax is very less. Let us understand the anatomy of this particular thing. And we all know that the right kidney is a bit lower as compared to the left kidney. And these figures are from an article written by my very close friend, Dr. Pankaj Maheshwari, whose article on supracostal puncture, I think is a must read for any person who practices PCNL. And this article is from the issue on percutaneous renal access in the Journal of Endourology in the year 2009. Now, anatomically, for an upper pole puncture, you need to understand that the lower limit of the parietal pleura crosses the 12th rib at its midpoint, which means that the lateral half of the 12th rib, that is from the mid-scapular line, is not covered by pleura. In the mid-scapular line, the parietal pleura is at the level of the 12th rib. The visceral pleura is at the level of the 10th rib. Lateral to the mid-scapular line, there is no parietal pleura around the 12th rib. There is no visceral pleura at the level of the 11th rib also. And during expiration, they ascend further. A question which is very often asked in a lot of workshops and CME is whether you need to make an upper pole puncture in inspiration or expiration. And I have no doubt in my mind that the puncture should be made in expiration because of the anatomical aspects which I have already explained. So the safe puncture of upper pole is one which is lateral to the mid-scapular line, which is below the 10th rib, which is done in deep expiration. If you are puncturing below the 10th, that is, even if it is a supra 11th puncture, not a supra 10th puncture, the visceral pleura is missed most of the time. If you are puncturing below the 11th rib, that is, it is only a supra 12th puncture, the parietal pleura is missed most of the times. So the principles of upper pole puncture are puncture in full expiration, skin puncture should be lateral to mid-scapular line, avoid puncture above the 10th rib. Always aim for calyx that sits more on the lateral aspect of the upper pole. By and large, an upper pole will always have only two calyces, one which is more medial and one which is lateral. Always puncture the lateral calyx, because if you are going to make a puncture which is more medial, then there is of damage to the posterior segmental artery. And we all know that it's an end artery which supplies 50% part of the kidney. If that is damaged, then the blood supply is gone and there would be torrential hemorrhage. So the same principle is used as is used for a lower pole puncture. You align yourself in line of that infundibulum. It does not matter whether your puncture is supra 12th or supra 11th. All these photographs of upper pole puncture have been given to me by Dr. Pankaj Maheshwari. Now there are certain finer points. Once you have made a puncture, how do you confirm that you have entered the posterior calyx only? If you have instilled some air, then the air comes on aspiration. The second thing which is very important is the glideware into the pelvis, unless it is obstructed by large calculus over there. And once the glideware has walked the pelvis and you to pass a needle or a dilator over it, there is no manipulation which is needed. This figure will explain it very well. This is the calyx which you think is a posterior calyx. Now, if you make a puncture, the guide wire will just walk in. If you make a puncture of an anterior calyx, then the guide wire will roll and then probably will enter into the pelvis. How to prevent injury to the liver and spleen? Clinically, when you examine a patient, look for hepatomegaly and splenomegaly. If at all you have missed it, always look at the sonography report. They always mention there is hepatomegaly or splenomegaly. And avoid too medial a puncture at the upper pole. Now, this is another area of worry for all persons who undertake a fluoroscopy guided puncture. That is, one can encounter a retrorenal colon. The incidence of a retrorenal colon is quoted as anything between 1 to 14%. And people say that very often in prone position, you are likely to encounter a retrorenal colon more often than in supine position. And perforation of the colon is seen in less than 1% of the cases. It is more common on the left side in thin-built patient, especially if the patient is a female. So you need to suspect a retrorenal colon. When would you suspect? If it's a horseshoe kidney, there is renal fusion, ectopia, patients have undergone a bariatric surgery or a jejuno-ileal bypass, or there is another area which I have picked up from my friend Dr. Pankaj Maheshwari, is that if you have decompressed a massive hydronephrosis or there is severe weight loss, then it can result in a retrorenal colon. He had presented this at the AUA, and that has, I will just show his figures to explain this concept. This is the normal orientation, that this is the kidney, this is the mesentery of the colon, and this is the colon. A hydronephrotic kidney tends to stretch the mesentery. Now, if there has been decompression of this hydronephrosis by putting in a DJ or by putting in a nephrostomy initially, and then you are doing a second stage or making another puncture at a later date, then by this time, due to the long mesocolon, the colon has gone retrorenally and you are likely to puncture it. This has been his experience of a retrorenal colon. I think experience of others would be very useful in validating this particular concept. So how to prevent injury to colon? First and foremost, suspect a retrorenal colon. Avoid too lateral a puncture. That is, do not go beyond the posterior axillary line, and always keep an eye on the gas shadow. If you think that your needle passage is indenting that gas shadow and is causing some alteration in its contour, it is possible that you are going through the colon. Now, which guide wire which you should pass once you have made a puncture? Urine, there is a free flow of urine which is coming. Dr. prefers passing ETFE wire. Though most of the urologists, I think, would be very comfortable, and I'm also comfortable using a hydrophilic glide wire, which easily finds its way through obstruction. It coils well, but though it is less likely to get kinked while doing dilatation, we need to remember that it is extremely slippery, and unless your assistant really knows how to hold it well, it is very much possible that it may come out. At the same time, everybody in India tends to reuse the wire, and when it loses its hydrophilic coating, it actually becomes quite stiff and it can cause a false passage also. Now, once you have made a puncture, you incise the skin site of puncture so that the subsequent dilators can go in easily. A lot of people remove the needle and pass a knife by the side of the guide wire. I would recommend that you keep the needle, pass the knife, so that even if there is some part of the knife which touches, it would touch the needle and not the glide wire. Importantly, try cutting the dorsolumbar fascia, because it is at that particular point where maximum number of kinks tend to occur when you are dilating. And this cutting of the skin and fascia is very important if the patient has undergone a prior renal surgery. Once you pass the wire, hold it near the skin. Keep in mind the angle and direction. And in the hybrid technique which I tend to use, when we start dilating, we even pass the dilators using the same angle. You use a protractor and you use the same angle so that the chances of kinking of the guide wire becomes virtually negligible. I do not use a safety wire, but for somebody who is new for doing, he's not such an expert and has just started doing PCNL, it would be a good idea to pass a dilator cannula, pass a safety wire, and then you are assured that at least you have something in hand, even if your guide wire comes out inadvertently. The next step, and an extremely important step, is dilatation of the tract. The aim of dilatation is create a tract for approaching the kidney and place an emplast sheath so that you create a low pressure system. What is the principle of tract dilatation? The principle of tract dilatation is creating a space in the renal parenchyma without damaging the functioning nephrons, and this is achieved by radial dilatation of the sheath. There are various types of dilators: alkanes metal dilators, emplast dilators, three-step telescopic dilators, balloon dilators. But which is the best dilator? I will quote two studies, one published in 2012, which felt that alkane and emplast dilators have the same level of efficiency. But in April 2020, hardly there are systematic and meta-analysis of 4 different tract methods: the alkane metal dilators, the emplast dilator, the one-shot dilatation, and the balloon dilatation. And their conclusion was, from the various studies, they concluded that metal telescopic dilators had a successful dilatation rate as compared with that of the one-shot dilatation, but no significant differences as far as the stone-free rate or transfusion rate were concerned. The present study determined that compared with other methods, one-shot dilatation was safer in almost every adult patient, including those that had previously undergone renal surgery, though it is recommended that one-shot dilatation should be performed by experienced surgeons only. The technique of dilatation is used to maintain the angle and direction of the guide rod, move the glide wire to confirm the correct angle. This is what is described as the glide wire friction test. This has been described in Indian Journal of Urology by Dr. Vasudev Ridhorkar from Nagpur, who described that when you are passing a dilator and you are not sure whether your angle is correct, you move the glide wire. If the glide wire is moving in and out easily, which means there is no friction, it means your direction is right. But if your movement is not without friction, which means that there is good amount of friction, it means that your dilator is at a wrong angle. It is extremely important that we hold the dilator very close to the skin and maintain the angle, the same angle for all the dilators. And for beginners, I can recommend that if you are following the hybrid technique, the angle that you have measured using the protractor, you use the same angle while passing the dilators also. It is important that you hold the dilator close to the skin so that if inadvertently it punctures, you do not overshoot, because over dilatation is far more disastrous than under dilatation. A simple trick which I can suggest is that when you are dilating, use your non-dominant hand. So if you are a right-handed person, use your left hand, because your left hand will exert less force and the chances of overshooting are much less. Another small trick which I would recommend very much is you pass all dilators in the same phase of respiration, because this change can result in some more trauma to the renal parenchyma. And we all know that it is not a perfect gold circle which comes in the parenchyma. It can be a stellate puncture. It can cause more stellate scars in the parenchyma and more trauma. So the dilatation also should be in the same phase of respiration. Another important thing is the movement of the dilator should be 2/3 by rotation and 1/3 by pushing, and not the other way around. Be slow. You think you are slow, but most of the times it is lack of complications which will shorten your procedure. So the movement should be 2/3 by rotation and 1/3 by push. Never apply undue force. Always dilate till the calyx. Under dilatation is better than over dilatation. And remember, if you are using the emplast dilators, then your dilatation will be at this point. Now suppose there is a calculus here, like there is a calculus here. And if you have used an Amplage dilator, then the conical part will have come here, the actual part where the Amplage sheath will come here. So in such cases where the calyx is completely filling the, is filled by a calculus, remember that if you have dilated an Amplage dilator and put Amplage sheath, you probably will be outside the parenchyma. In such situations where the calculus is filling up the calyx, always use an alkane metal dilator. Infundibulum dilatation. If you feel the infundibulum is narrow, it should be done with Amplage dilators. The passage of Amplage sheath. Now, once you have dilated, you feel it's the easiest step to do. Honestly, it is easy. Always use an Amplage because it decreases the intrapelvic and facilitates removal of calculus. But important thing to know is that always use the correct size. When you use the same Amplage sheath over and over again, you start realizing that a 24 Amplage sheath actually becomes 26. And there is a big gap between the Amplage sheath and the dilator. So when you pass that Amplage sheath, you cause trauma to the parenchyma. And this can cause significant amount of bleeding. All movements of introducing the Amplage sheath are by rotating. So in conclusion, I can say that a good percutaneous renal access determines your failure or success in PCNL. Whether you will have such a highway as we are experiencing now with no traffic or disaster depends on how good a puncture you have achieved. If everybody is willing, should I go ahead with during access? I think we are still having some about 10-15 minutes. I'll rush through it. There are a lot of problems that you can have. We will look at is what is the cause, how can we prevent it, and how can we take care of it. The first problem that we can encounter is failure to opacify the system. When you make the patient prone, it is possible that the ureteric catheter has slipped out, or it's an extremely impacted calculus where the contrast does not go. Remember, always secure the ureteric catheter properly to the Foley's catheter. Use a glide wire. Most of the times the glide wire is able to pass across the impacted calculus and you can then park your ureteric catheter. Now, suppose you cannot opacify the system at all, then make a direct puncture of the percutaneous the system by using a Chiba needle. The second problem that can come is you have injected the contrast and there is complete extravasation and you cannot identify the pelvic axial system. In such a scenario, what you can do to prevent it is keep the ureteric catheter at the level of the renal pelvis. Inject small amounts of diluted contrast, 2 cc, 3 cc at a time. If you have extravasation, have patience. Ask the anesthetist to give Lasix. Wait for about say 10-15 minutes. Very often it clears up. Sometimes it does not, then you can use an angiographic catheter, or worse come worse, you may have to postpone the procedure. The use of an angiographic catheter is recommended because if such is the scenario where there is extravasation of the contrast and ureteric catheter is not seen, you can pass an angiographic catheter because its tip is most of the time seen. You can see the tip here and you know this is the calyx you want to puncture, and then you puncture that particular calyx using the tip of the angiographic catheter as your guide. Inability to puncture honestly comes due to lack of experience. If you have good idea regarding the various puncture techniques, you are able to achieve the successful puncture most of the times. If you are worried in a case where there is not much dilatation, it is better to have the help of an experienced colleague when you are doing this procedure. Now, you have made a puncture, but there is blood at the tip of needle. It is possible that the needle is either in the parenchyma or it has entered the vessel. Always have a good puncturing technique. If you are doubtful about the position, confirm it by rotating movements of the C-arm, asking your assistant to inject saline from the ureteric catheter. ideally you should have a free flow of saline. Now, if there has been minimal puncture of the parenchyma, say initial 2 punctures were not proper and the third puncture is proper, so it is possible you will get some blood in the initial part that you have aspirated. But as your assistant is injecting more amount of saline below, most of the time this will clear up. But if there is persistently blood which is coming out, it means that your puncture is not proper. Make a puncture again, realign the needle, but do not advance the guide wire if there is only a needle which is getting aspirated. Inability to park the guide wire. This can be because the guide wire is outside the system, or the calyx is completely occupied by the calculus, the guide wire is not passing into the system, or it can happen if a renal cyst is punctured and what you have aspirated is fluid, and you think that you have entered into the pelvic calyceal system. What you need to do is always confirm a free flow of turf or line after the puncture. Use a hydrophilic good quality glide which passes into the renal pelvis, and always a sonography is done. If the sonologist has mentioned the of a cyst, always remember that it's possible that you may have punctured the renal cyst. How do you overcome this situation? Repuncture or reinsert the guide wire so that it is in the pelvic calyceal system. Never ever go ahead unless you are sure that your guide wire is properly parked in the pelvic calyceal system. If you have not been able to pass the guide wire into the ureter, it doesn't matter. You can keep your guide wire into the upper pole calyx if you are going from the lower pole, or into the lower pole calyx if you are going from the upper pole. But have as much guide wire as possible in the pelvic calyceal system. Talking of the guide wire, I have already mentioned that this happens because of forceful dilatation in a wrong direction, especially against resistance. And this usually tends to at level of the rectum fascia. Use of a hydraulic glide prevents occurrence because it is less prone for kinking. But the best way is dilate in a correct direction, dilate using less force and more by rotating movement, and use the guide wire friction test to make the dilatation is in the correct direction. But now suppose if the kink has occurred, keep the dilator at that level, pull the kink in the dilator, and then follow the principles of dilatation and go ahead. Under dilatation, you have dilated, you go in and you realize that you are outside. Come out, pass a rigid guide rod over the guide wire, again dilate, use metal dilators, go in. Sometimes there is a technique which is described as you do a nephroscopy, you know that you are outside, you see the guide wire, use the biprong forceps, open the biprong forceps between keeping the guide wire in between the two jaws of the forceps, dilate that area, enter that calyx using the nephroscope, and then pass the Amplatz sheath over it. Over dilatation, this is totally preventable, and this tends to occur due to only forceful dilatation. As I had already mentioned, dilatation should be 2/3 by rotation and 1/3 by force. Hold the guide rod firmly close to the skin and do not try to dilate till the level of the calculus. You need to dilate only till the calyx. Now suppose over dilatation has happened and you have perforated the pelvis. If it's a small pelvic perforation and you think you can do fragmentation of the calculus and remove it quickly, go ahead. But if there is a massive perforation or there is significant bleeding, put a large bore nephrostomy tube, come out, clamp the tube, you live to fight another day. You may have lost that battle, but survive to win the war. It is always better to underdilate than to overdilate. Loss of tract. If the glide wire has slipped out before dilatation is complete, this is total loss of tract. The best way to avoid this particular complication is park the glide wire adequately in a distant calyx or pass it till the bladder. If possible, keep a safety wire, and once the glide wire has gone and you feel you can pass a super stiff wire, pass a super stiff wire. Now suppose you have lost the tract. If the Amplatz sheath is close to the parenchyma, ask your assistant to instill diluted, very much diluted methylene blue from the ureteric catheter and see from where it is coming. Most of the times we are able to find out from where the methylene blue is coming. Navigate your way through using a small size nephroscope and enter the system. Once you have entered the system, pass a guide wire and then dilate. In case you are unable to find out, go for another puncture. Remember friends, all of us have had a significant learning curve. But try and fail, but don't fail to try. Because Albert Einstein mentioned, you never fail until you stop trying. Thank you so much for a very, very, very patient hearing. If you want, I would put my thoughts on supine PCNL, but I think I should restrict myself to this at this point only. And if there are some questions, I should take that.
Sir, there are few like Dr. Bhojraj has raised his hand, so I will unmute him. So if you want to ask anything, he can ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Canara, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Thank you very much for enlightening all of the things, because this is a sort of refreshment for all of us. Amidst this corona pandemic, I hope all the urology community in India, Nepal and abroad are safe at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Main thing that always in puncture, we know that all pelvic calcial system is like complete of that patient. Agree with this or not, sir?
Perfect. There are not two pelvic systems which can be said to be. There are no homozygous pelvic calcial systems.
Yeah, that's why this is the thumbprint of the patient from urological perspective.
Yeah.
So again, site, angle, and depth.
Yes.
These three things we always keep in mind. And about depth, would you please repeat the highlight, because there are few of the urologists who have joined later on. And about depth perception, because this point, would you please repeat the highlight, repeat and highlight about that?
See, there are two aspects which I would like to comment on it. One is calculating the depth. If you know the one side, that is the radius or the point distance from point A to B in the hybrid technique, you know the side, you have calculated the angle, and then you know the depth of puncture by using the universal triangle solver. But this will give you an idea, okay, the depth is at 5.5 centimeter. But once you make the puncture from that particular site inside the pelvic calcial system, your real worry is whether you are in the calyx or not. If there is a free flow of saline which is coming, you are sure that you are in the system.
Yes.
But sometimes you are not sure. Then the question comes whether you are above the calyx or whether you are below the calyx. Isn't it?
Yes. Yes,
the
sir.
simplest thing is, remember MSLD. MS is the name of one of India's most famous captains. He is Mahendra Singh Dhoni. He is known as MS. So what is medial, that is, which has been gone too far beyond, is
yes.
If you rotate the Siam towards you, if you have rotated the Siam towards you, what is medial to is superficial. That is, your needle is medial to the calyx. It means you are superficial. If you are lateral to the calyx, you will be at the depth. If you are rotating the Siam in a craniocaudal direction, then the simplest thing is you put another needle above the calyx. If your calyx, whether it is in between the two needles, that is the needle at the skin surface and or whether it is below it, it determines whether you are superficial or deep to that calyx. So if you are moving the Siam in a craniocaudal direction, my suggestion would be keep a small needle at the skin surface and see whether your calyx is in between the two needles, that is the one which you have punctured and one which you have kept at the surface. Or if you are moving the Siam towards you, you remember the mnemonic, what is medial is superficial, and what is lateral is at the depth.
So Dr. Pradeep, I have unmute you. If you have any questions, you can ask because you have raised your hand. Yeah, Dr. Pradeep.
I'm not able to hear him. Yep.
Yeah, you have raised your hand. You had any query?
So by this time, I will answer one of the questions which has come is how to prevent accidental system perforation by ureteric catheter and following contrast extravasation. See, I think I have already answered this question when I mentioned that if there is extravasation, you wait, ask the anesthetist to give Lasix. Very often it clears. If not, try using an angiographic catheter. On one of the, I remember at least on 1 or 2 occasions, I have remembered that I used that angle technique. I measure the angle and using that angle, I went in again. Once it has happened when I was at another urologist place that the extravasation was so bad that we had to postpone that case. But I have already mentioned this in my talk that you wait, give Lasix, use an angiographic catheter. You can use one attempt of the hybrid technique where you know the angle of puncture and then you know where you have entered.
So should I unmute everyone so that if they have any query, they can unmute and they can
Yeah.
ask you?
There is another question which has come is, can we puncture using only air pyelogram? Honestly, if you ask me, I would not advise it because there have been good number of case reports where they have mentioned air embolism as one of the complications of instillation of too much of air using in high pressure system. So I think air should be used only as a last resort when you are not sure which is the posterior calyx. Otherwise, air need not be used most of the times. I think you can unmute everybody, and if anybody has questions one by one, they can ask it.
Sure, sir. If anyone has query, you can unmute.
Hello.
Yeah, Piyush.
Yes, sir. Sir, do you recommend culture to be sterile every time before proceeding for surgery in case of Saigon or any large stone? So your voice is not audible.
Yeah, you are asking whether the urine should be sterile before you are going for a puncture or PCNL.
Yes, sir.
See,
Yes, sir.
you should always do a urine culture before any PCNL. And
Okay.
if culture report has come positive, at least 2 to 3 days of culture specific antibiotic should be given unless before undertaking PCNL. I never do it without that.
Okay. Okay. Which antibiotic you prefer, sir?
Now, if it is culture specific antibiotic, whatever has come, then otherwise, if the urine culture has come sterile and the other parameters, that is the total count and other things are total count is less than 10,000, I use a combination of ceftriaxone tazobactam with an aminoglycoside or cefoperazone sulbactam as a single shot. Culture sterile cases, a single shot antibiotic for PCNL what is enough most of the times. But if it's a Saigon or it's a culture positive case, then 3 days of culture specific antibiotic and then continuing it further for another 2 days.
So many people prefer giving oral antibiotics for 10 to 15 days till the stent is there in situ.
No, that is perfectly right. There is nothing wrong in In fact, there are people who give oral antibiotics even prior to surgery. There have been two case
Yeah.
reports, two publications, one using ciprofloxacin and the second using nitrofurantoin. Both have, one I think came in British Journal of Urology, which said that if you give antibiotics for 7 days before surgery, the incidence of bleeding is less. See, ultimately it all points out to the same thing, that there is some degree of infection because of these large calculi, which may or may not be picked up by culture specific antibiotic. So it's always better to cover up with antibiotics. But
Till the stent is
very
there
often
inside.
it has been a clean case. A single shot antibiotic is enough and we do not repeat the antibiotic.
Hello, sir.
Right, there has been a question from Imran Mir that what should be done if the guide wire gets kinked and how to proceed. I think I have answered it. There is another question from Gaurav that what is the trick of putting in a DJ stand? Two, three tricks that I can suggest is that one is you can pass the DJ right through the nephroscope. I usually pass a zebra wire at the end of the procedure, and from that zebra wire, I can easily pass the DJ. Another way which has been published by Dr. Maheshwari has been pass the zebra in the rear, that is the stiff end from the ureteric catheter, keeping the Empla sheath right in front of the ureteric catheter so that the guide wire comes out through the Empla sheath, and then under fluoroscopy you can put the floppy end in the bladder, bring it to the point of the ischial spine, take out the ureteric catheter, coil the ureteric catheter in the bladder, and then put in a DJ. Otherwise, most of the times putting in a DJ is not a major problem. Any other question?
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me, sir? Sir, good afternoon.
Yeah, please.
Nice
Yeah,
presentation,
please.
sir. Sir, I have a question, like I have doubt, I don't know whether you also have experiences things or not. Usually, especially in obese patients, on 0 and 30 degree, you have localized the things and you have entered the calyx properly. And on 0 degree as well as 30 degree, you seem to be inside the system. But when you remove the stellate of the needle, diamond tip needle, 18 gauge, the urine does not come. And everything seems to be absolutely in place. In that scenario, if you push a little bit more, maybe 1 mm or 1.5 or 2 mm more, then you start getting the fluid or the water which has been instilled through uric acid. What is your experience on that, or what do you say about that? Any
I
experience,
think
or what do
you
you
mentioned a very important thing, which I rather missed mentioning in my entire talk. That when you are when you have pumped it, you should always keep on asking your assistant to instill some amount of saline from below. And when you are putting in dilators, like in metal dilators also, it is a very good practice to ask your assistant to keep on instilling 2 to 3 cc of saline from the ureteric catheter. They should not instill the saline when you are not introducing, that is, you have only the guide wire in place, because that would cause some extravasation outside the kidney. Otherwise, once the needle is in place, the installation of saline from below is definitely a must. And what you mentioned is correct. I think this has been the experience of each and every one of us who practices PCNL, that it takes some time. And especially this happens if there are a lot of calculi which are blocking the pelvic calyceal system. It takes some time. That is, once you make a puncture, either the saline comes out or you use a 2 cc syringe and aspirate. And most of the times, if you are in the calyx, made a proper puncture, you are able to aspirate saline.
Sir, thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
There is a question, I think, from Dr. Darshan, that while measuring the angle in hybrid technique, do I ask my anesthetist to hold it in end expiration? Yes, I definitely ask them. They maintain it in end expiration, and they maintain it in the same phase of respiration, that is end expiration, during the phase of dilatation. Whenever I pass each one of my dilators, it's the same phase of expiration. There is a question from Anurag Chatterjee, that is, how can we be sure that the colon is not getting punctured? I think I already mentioned that you need to be sure that you are not too lateral. See, when I use my hybrid technique of puncture, I don't look at where that needle comes. I trust, and so far so good. My experience in the last 8 to 10 years using this technique has been without any complications of puncturing the colon. When you are making a puncture, keep a watch on the gas shadow of the colon. This is what Dr. S.K. Pal sir always mentions in his talks, that if you feel there is an indentation of that area or the gas bubble which you are seeing, be careful. But if you are not too lateral, you need not worry. You can very easily enter the system. I always use my hybrid technique, and I have never had a problem using that technique.
Good afternoon, sir. What
Yeah.
is your experience with Miniperk PCNL?
See, the same thing. Miniperk, if the principles remain the same of puncture, the only thing comes is in dilatation. I go directly, I use the Miniperk from Karl Stores, where I go by a single shot dilatation using the single shot dilator. So that's it.
Sir, how do you compare the vision in the rod lens and the fiber optic?
Fiber optic, I have no experience of using a flexible nephroscope.
Okay. Okay.
I have a Miniperk, I have a standard nephroscope, but I have no experience of using a flexible nephroscope.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Hello.
Hello, I'm not getting your voice, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, how to remove multiple gravels after doing a stag-on calculus? It becomes very tedious to remove all.
It is tedious, yes. See, if you are using a Miniperk, and there are a lot of people who even tackle stag-on stones by doing a Miniperk,
Yes.
there is a simple trick that I can suggest is that you tilt the OT table towards yourself. Even if you are using a standard, using a 24 French Ampla sheet also,
24, yeah.
you can tilt the table towards yourself. And there is a paper from Nadiad by Dr. Arvind Ganfule, where they say that in Miniperk, they mention, if I remember rightly, a Berluski's principle of the what is called as a vacuum pump effect in Miniperk. Tilt the patient, this is far better, and most of the times it comes out. If not, giving a wash is very useful. You can use a suction microscope if you have used a large thing, but very honestly, the most important thing that you need to have is good amount of patience while removing the gravels, because they really test your patience. But tilting the table towards yourself, instilling some amount of saline, asking your assistant to flush from below, using a small amount of suction if the need be, but most of the times if you give a wash, you can cut the tip of a Nelaton catheter, apply a Foley adapter below, and pass it through the Ampla sheath and give a good wash. A lot of gravel come out. Tilt the table towards yourself. Last resort is suction, and most important thing is patience.
Thank you.
There is another question from Piyush, that is another trick to prevent puncture site leak. Honestly, I did not get this question.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
So many times we encounter leak from the puncture site after removal of nephrostomy.
Yeah, that does happen. You keep a nephrostomy. I think very soon you'll have an article in the Indian Journal of Urology from Dr. Pankaj, which mentions that if you puncture the upper pole, most of the times you don't get leak. post-op.
Mm-hmm.
If you have punctured the hole, sometimes the leak is much more. But what I have found is that if your PCNL is straightforward,
Okay. Yeah.
you never encounter much of a leak. See,
Right.
if the leak would have been so significant, tubeless PCNL would never have come in place because there would be always perinephric collections. So most
Right.
of the times the leak is not much. But if the PCNL has not gone smoothly, there has been a lot of torque on the renal parenchyma. It's a very thin parenchyma. There are some gravels which are obstructing the infundibulum, then the leak lasts for a longer time. But if there is no obstruction to the flow of urine from the pelvis in the ureter and no blockage of the infundibulum of the calyx which you have punctured, the leak stops sooner rather than later. Another one of my experience has been that sometimes we are worried that the leak has been, it has been a stormy PCNL and you tend to keep a nephrostomy for a longer time, say for more than 72 hours. And in these instances, the leak is a bit longer as compared to the leak when you keep a nephrostomy only for 36 to 48 hours.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So, sir,
Sir, in your experience, we find that the middle and the lower calyceal punctures bleed more than the superior calyceal punctures?
No, but very honestly, more than 50% of my punctures are upper pole punctures.
Yes, sir.
So much so that my anesthetist sometimes says ki you are fond of texting me. But it is how I have picked up and I practice. And I think I have done good number of supracostal punctures, supra 12th and supra 11th, which are tubeless. So it is not associated with much risk of developing pleural complications.
Yes. Even we have the same experience.
Good. Yeah, another question by Dr. Sanjay Deshpande sir has been ki kinking at times tends to occur at the renal capsule, and he is right because this is another area where you encounter resistance, because two common areas where you encounter resistance is one is at the level of the thoracolumbar fascia and other is at the level of the renal capsule. But honestly, in my experience, managing kink at the level of the renal capsule is a much easier task because your emplas has reached by at that point, and then you can very easily enter using a nephroscope or a smaller size nephroscope, or you can also use the biprong forceps as I have mentioned in entering. The real problem comes is if you have developed multiple kinks at the level of renal capsule and at the level of thoracolumbar fascia, then sometimes getting these kinks into the dilator and reaching up to the capsule and parenchyma is really challenging. Any more questions?
Sir, which is the nephroscope that you currently use and which is your favorite? The wool for the
It depends upon if I am using a mini PCNL, then I have a standard mini PCNL set of Karl Storz. For standard nephroscopy, I use a 24 French nephroscope. I also have one from Wolf, one from Storz. The Dresden nephroscope is a good nephroscope to use. So all nephroscopes are good, but I think if you are using a mini PCNL, I think the Storz set is any mini PCNL 12 French nephroscope is good. When it comes to standard nephroscopes for a standard PCNL of 24 French, I think Wolf has stood the test of time. So if there are no further questions, yeah, please.
Sir, there is question from Dr. Vijay Kumar Shukla.
Yeah.
Sir, please explain use of O craniocaudal view in PCNL.
Yeah, I just saw this question. Oh, very honestly, Vijay, I have not understood this question. What do you mean by craniocaudal view?
Sir, same he was written like, can you describe use of CR by diagram in craniocaudal direction?
Okay. I will just show you this.
It was from Dr. Vijay Kumar only.
Okay. I will just show you the PowerPoint. Yes. Share. And I will just show you this figure, which I think should explain things. See. Oh no. Stop share. Share screen. Share. Okay. I'll just show. Give me a couple of seconds and I'll show you that. Are you able to see this photograph? Yeah. See, once you tilt the CR, the localization of the needle to its targets indicates that it will be above this. See, I'll explain. It is very difficult to remember all this. The simplest thing is, if you are not sure and you want to ascertain the position of the needle in the craniocaudal direction, you first bring the CM to 0 degree, keep another needle at the level of the calyx. Then you tilt the CM craniocaudally. And then you look at this thing, that if X is between the two needles, the puncture needle is deep, which means that you need to adjust your needle more superficially. If the target calyx is below the two needles, it means that your needle is more superficial and it should be adjusted towards the depth. Very honestly, after I have started using my hybrid technique, I hardly remember the need to use this particular thing. Of course, with experience, probably the need to do these things always come down. But this has been my experience that with the hybrid technique, you know, this is the angle and you go ahead, and most of the times you have hit the calyx. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Right. Another question is my opinion regarding bilateral PCNL in the same sitting. I have done it on number of occasions. If the patient's overall fitness or performance status is good, the anesthetist is comfortable, and your PCNL on one side has been absolutely uneventful, I think you can go ahead and do it on the other side. There's no problem. There are n number of articles on it, enough literature which recommends this.
Sir, do you do your PCNLs under regional or general anesthesia?
Both. We have done even supracostal punctures under regional anesthesia, but let me again emphasize that unless you gain a good degree of experience, always prefer general anesthesia, because the phase of respiration is under control. The control of respiration is extremely important in the initial phase of your career as a PCNL expert. Once you gain good degree of expertise, you can do it under regional anesthesia. But even today, if it's a large calculus, a large TAG-on, which is likely to take good amount of time, I would always prefer general anesthesia.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Piyush.
Yeah, Piyush, I think I answered your question that you
yes,
can
yes,
do
yes, I got that answer, sir.
And there is a question by Priyanksha. I'll just answer that. When I say rotate the C-arm, it is 30 degrees towards the head end. Because see, most of our tables are having the support which is eccentric. The thing which is supporting the table is more closer to the head end. To rotate the C-arm more towards the foot end is very much restricted most of the times. Yeah, Piyush, please go ahead with your question.
So suppose during a PCNL interop, we found there is small papillary tumor in the PCS, then what is to be done?
Never had the misfortune of having noticed this, and I honestly feel that's a very, because see, it's very unusual.
It's a rare possibility.
It's a, most of the times if you are looking at a tumor with a large calculus, you are likely to encounter a squamous cell carcinoma and not a papillary tumor. But as far as I remember, the recommendation is that you try to excise it as much as possible. You can take a biopsy in case you do not have any means by which you can resect it. See, if you have put an Ampla sheath, you can put a resectoscope and go ahead. That's
Yes,
not
correct.
going to be a problem. But in case you are unable to do so, I think taking a biopsy is the least that you can do. But such things, if you are using a mini PCNL, you can take a biopsy and fulgurate it
With the
using
laser. Yes.
So it needs to be tackled. And as you have rightly said, it is likely to be a small sized papillary tumor. Otherwise, a substantial sized would always
Yeah,
be
that will be picked up on ultrasound or CT.
initial imaging.
Yes, sir.
So I think if all questions are exhausted, can we call it a day? Thank you so much for a very patient hearing. And if there are any days or newly passed urologists, I would strongly recommend, it has been my experience that hybrid technique really helps in decreasing the learning curve. I have also learned PCNL by a lot of reading and with the help of a lot of experts and my very good friends who have always helped me. Subsequently, also, if there are any queries, feel free to ask me. You can also mail me at drgrsharma, that is drgsharma@gmail.com for any of your queries, and I would be very happy to answer them. Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Sharma, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So this is Suresh Tripathi from Alembic, actually from Mumbai.
Okay.
Sir,
Yeah,
actually, I wanted to thank you for associating with us, and I think it was an excellent, elaborate session. It was more like having a training program for a lot of people. A lot of queries had been resolved by you at, I think, length. And this would be a pleasure to associate with you going forward as well, sir. Since this is the time when almost everybody is sitting at home and not allowed to move out. So this would be a time to, brush up maybe a technical knowledge more so at this moment, and going forward, that will help them to probably utilize it out. So it will be a pleasure to let us know if we can plan it out furthermore like this.
Definitely. I have also enjoyed it because I enjoy this topic, and it was really heartening to know that there were a lot of queries and people, I hope, liked this talk and it was useful and informative for them. Knowledge only grows by sharing with all others, and inputs from everybody has helped me in my journey in learning and getting experience in PCNL. And it is my moral obligation to do the same subsequently for the coming generation.
That's true, sir. That is something what's called working for society at large when you are giving back, actually. Thank you, sir. Thanks for all your contribution.
Thank you so much. Thank you.